Today we are going to discuss how banks create money. One of the most interesting fact about modern banking is this: banks can literally can create money out of thin air. Though banks do not have the ability to print new dollar bills or currencies, however, banks can create money through their process of deposits and loans. And we are going to discuss this using an example. So here's the bottom line. The bottom line is this: the banking system can create money through the process of making loans. The question is, how is it possible? And an example will help you to clarify what the process is. Before we go into details, let's go back to a definition of money. And by definition, M1 definition of money is currencies plus demand deposits. Here C stands for again, what is demand deposits? These are the money that we deposit in a bank in our checking accounts, and currencies are money that is floating in our pockets or in our home, in our piggy bank. These are the currencies. When we add these two things up, we get the M1 measure of money. And in this particular lecture, we'll just focus on the M1 measure. So let's start with a simple example. Assume first an imaginary country named Sienna land without any banks at all. In this simple world, currency is the only form of money. To be concrete, let's suppose that the total quantity of currency is $2,000. The supply of money is therefore. So in this particular case, there's no bank, so your demand deposits are 0. So your M1 is C plus DD. All you have currency in circulations where C is equal to 2000 and DD equal to 0. So M1 is 2000. So your this amount is $2,000, which is also equal to your currency. So your money supply is $2,000 equivalent to currency because there are no banks, so there's no deposits and no loans. So next, let's make our life a little bit more complicated. Now suppose someone in Sienna land opens a bank appropriately called First National Bank of Sienna. First National Bank of Sienna is only a depository institution, that is, it accepts deposits but does not make loans. So it only accepts deposits, no loans. Assume that people deposit 50% of currency in the bank in checking accounts. The supply of money is therefore, again by definition, your supply of money is M1 equal to C plus DD. Now how much is the currency? If out of $2,000, 50% are deposited in a bank, that means people are left with $1,000 in their pockets. So that's currency is $1,000. How much is the demand deposits? People deposited rest of the $1,000 in the checking account. So they deposited, and our money supply would be 2000. So money supply didn't change because still by definition money supply is currency plus demand deposits. Now let's quickly look into the T account or balance sheet of the bank. Remember, T account is also the balance sheet of a bank. And in a balance sheet, there is always the assets and the liability side. So we'll try to draw it. So you have the assets here, you have liabilities here. Now when somebody deposit a money in a bank, that becomes a liability. So how much is the deposits? Is $1,000. How much is the loan? Now this bank doesn't give out loans. All they have deposits, so all of that money will go into their reserves. So their reserves are $1,000 as well. So $1,000 that's deposited becomes reserves, and your balance sheet is balanced and net worth is still 0. Let's make it a little bit more complicated. And here's the fun begins. Now suppose First National Bank have decided to start a loan business. The bank has decided to keep 10% of deposits as reserves and lend out the rest of the money. Therefore, the reserves with the First National Banks are, so how much is the reserves of the bank? Now, what is 10% of now bank? This bank has $1,000 in deposits and they want to keep 10% as reserve and they want to lend out rest of the 90%. So 10% of 1000 is, so reserves equal to 10% of 1000, which is equal to 10 times 1000, which gives you 100. So reserves for this bank is 100 and bank can lend out how much? 1000 minus 100, which is $900 they can lend out. And now let's again look at the T account of this bank. Assets, liabilities, deposits, which remains 1000. Now bank has a loan and they loan out how much? 900 and their reserves are $100 and still the account is balanced because your liabilities is equal to your assets. Now let's make it a little bit more complicated. Suppose Jim, a resident of Sienna land, needs to borrow money to install solar panels in his house. He borrows $900 from the First Sienna Bank. The supply of money is therefore. Now, when Jim goes out and borrows $900, so he gets $900 in his pocket. So, how much is the currency? So, in this case, your currency C is initially $1,000 that's floating around, plus Jim gets that $900 from the First Sienna Bank and that the money that he borrowed, so it becomes a cash in his pocket. So it includes another $900. So your total currency is now 1900, which is floating. And how much is the demand deposits? Demand deposits is still 1000. Mind you, people who deposited $1,000 in the First National Bank, First National Bank still owe them $1,000. So deposits remains still 1000. And how much is our money supply? Our money supply now is C plus DD 1900 plus 1000, which gives you $2,900. So our money supply is, so we just saw how the bank just created new money without printing any money just by giving out a loan. So every time a bank gives out a loan, they create new money. And our money supply has increased from $2,000 to $2,900. Let's give you a little bit more example. Though Jim borrowed the money, but his delivery of solar panels got delayed by 6 months. He needs to make payments after delivery. So he decides to put his $900 in Second Bank of Siena, which is another bank, in his checking account. So supply of money in this case, now that he takes his $900 and put it in a bank. So what happens? This becomes a new deposit. So our new currency is C remains now $1,000. That's our initial money in circulation because Jim just deposited his $900. How much is the demand deposits? Demand deposits are initial $1,000 with First Siena Bank. Now the second bank of Siena also have $900 in deposits from Jim, which adds up, which makes it 1900. So your currencies are 1000, your demand deposits are 1900, and your total money supply is 2900. So let's discuss this bank's T account, second Sienna Bank's T account. So this second Sienna Bank has a T account. Again, assets, liabilities, deposits, which is Jim's money, which is dollar 900 that he deposited. So this becomes a reserves of dollar 900. Now what this second Sienna Bank is going to do with the $900 that Jim deposited? Obviously is going to loan it out. Again, is going to keep a part of that $900 to carry out the day-to-day transactions, which is also called reserves, and is going to lend out the rest of the money. So, and this process can go on forever, and every time a bank is lending out money, it's creating more money in the system. Finally, I would like to discuss something called the multiplier and the multi-bank system. If all banks loan out their reserves, the money supply will expand. That we just learned. So every time they are loaning out, the money supply is increasing. In a multi-bank system, institutions determine the amount of money that the system can create by using something called money multiplier. What is a money multiplier? It's a very easy formula. It's 1 over the reserve requirement. Reserve requirement in our case was 10%, but it varies. 10% in above example. So what you need to do, you need to multiply this multiplier by the initial loan. So to, or initial deposit to be precise. So how much money will be created if this goes on in this particular example? Your R is a reserve requirement is 10%. So money multiplier, so 1 over 10%, which gives you 1 over 10 times 100, which gives you 10. Now what's the increase in money supply? Question is by how much money supply will increase? Is 10 times initial deposits of $1,000, which gives you $10,000. So money supply in this system will go up by $10,000 if this process goes on for some time. And this is called money multiplier process, one of the most important processes in which the modern banking can create money out of thin air just by lending more money.